I don't think that they've done anything wrong in terms of pursuing that loophole and pointing out that the rules are poorly drafted.
There's nothing about this besides legal chutzpah that's admirable.
You could argue it both ways. Clearly, there's a number of clubs that are going to be absolutely furious.
At the top of the show, we spoke about Leicester City avoiding a points deduction this season after winning their appeal for a breach of Premier League profit and sustainability rules. Leicester were charged in March for breaching spending rules for the 3-year period ending June 2023. But this is key. Leicester argued, and successfully argued, the charge could not be applied as they had already been relegated when the accounts were completed in June 2023. In other words, to put it in terms that you and I might understand, Leicester here were saved by their own relegation and saved by the timing of their account submission. Simon, you've been pretty outspoken this morning about Leicester's part in all of this. FFP expert Stefan Borson has joined us here in studio. Stefan, good morning to you. And thanks for finding time to come in, because you're a man in demand. In your eyes, have the Premier League been left with egg in their face here, Stefan?
Well, without question. I mean, even their own barrister in both of the hearings, the original independent commission and also in the appeal, admitted that the rules were poorly drafted. And that's their own barrister. So not a great starting point. They actually did try and rely on the fact that they were poorly drafted to create ambiguity in the rules that therefore meant that the overall context needed to be taken into account, presumably because they knew that on a strict interpretation of the rule, the appeal would find what the appeal found, which is pretty clear, that if your accounting period ends on the 30th of June, you don't breach until, at the earliest, midnight on the 30th of June, because in the period before that, you have an ability, even if theoretical, to get yourself out of it and remedy it. Now, the interesting thing about it is that actually Leicester's year end was actually meant to be the 31st of May 2023. But at the end of April, unbeknownst, well, we did know about it, but we didn't know exactly why, they moved their accounting reference date to the 30th of June.
And now we know.
Had it been the 31st of May, they would have been captured by these rules and they would have had a points deduction. So, smart move, on the ball, clearly consulting all the way through with, I assume, Nick DeMarco, who led the case for them. And, from a legal perspective, a success. But, you can't really question Simon's point earlier, which is that they did breach on the face of it, just that effectively they won't be punished for it because they found a lacuna.
Absolutely. And what about Simon's earlier point as well? You were obviously listening on your way in here, Stefan. I'm pleased about that. Leicester have gained the system. That's what you said. They've gained the system, right?
Frankly, they have a fiduciary duty to their stakeholders in the wider sense, both the fans and also the board and the shareholders, to do what they can to avoid this kind of punishment. I mean, it would be crazy for them to not take advantage of a legal argument that they have and they feel that it's strong. So I don't think that they've done anything wrong in terms of pursuing that loophole and pointing out that the rules are poorly drafted and convincing a very, very high quality appeal board that they're right. So the criticism, I think, is probably largely with the Premier League for not having its rules watertight. It's not that hard, in fairness, to fill these gaps. There's a very simple amendment that they could have made to the definition of a club, and also the EFL does have a rule that effectively says, just so that you're aware, for the avoidance of doubt, if you're ever promoted out of the Championship, we still consider you a Championship side until all your obligations under the EFL rules have been fulfilled.
So they're best to draft. Stefan, let me ask you this. Does this ruling mean the league, how will I put it, will never be able to take similar action against any other relegated club?
No, it doesn't. No, it's very specific, and they will fill the hole.
It sets a precedent.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't, because they'll change the rules. I mean, what this says very clearly, the appeal says very clearly, the rules are the rules and they're unambiguous, and therefore we just read the rule. And in this case, Leicester are outside of the remit of what's defined as a club within those rules, because they weren't a club, because a club in respect of that rule is a Premier League club. And as at 30th of June, when the breach actually occurs, 30th of June at midnight, the end of their accounting period, they weren't a Premier League club, and therefore the rules say they aren't captured. Simple as that. So all that has to happen now is the Premier League tightens it up at the next revision of the rules, and that won't be there next time for somebody to benefit.
Opportunity to find some bad drafting. I mean, Stefan's right. Of course, there is a fiduciary responsibility to your stakeholders, but that would also be superseded by a greater fiduciary responsibility to run the football club in the first place, which doesn't breach his financial fair play and doesn't have to rely on a technicality, which then invokes the fiduciary responsibility to do the best you can for the stakeholders that you ultimately put in a position of being in jeopardy in the first place. And it all goes to the heart, and we can debate this forever and a day, about PRS. And the means and the worth of it, and what sustainability looks like to one person is what it looks like to another.
Yeah. There's one message, Simon. Simon lauds Chelsea for being savvy about finding loopholes, but when Leicester do it, then it's elitist, and he's bitter about them.
I'm not bitter about anyone because I have no emotional investment in Leicester any more than I do in Chelsea. But my point is what loopholes have Chelsea found? They haven't
selling hotels.
They've sold assets. If Manchester City had bought, if Manchester City knew what they knew now 15 years ago, they probably would have bought Manchester City in a very different way with a load of assets that can be able to shelter. But there's not a loophole. It's just a simple fact. A hotel or an asset that's owned by a business is the same as a player. You can crystallise its worth if you want to.
Yeah.
There's nothing about this besides legal chutzpah and acumen that's admirable. There's nothing about it.
Well, I think you could argue it both ways. I mean, you could say Chelsea have also benefited from the absence of a rule in the way that Leicester have benefited from the absence of a rule. And that rule in the Leicester case...
It's not an absence of a rule. Leicester's situation is badly drafted. Chelsea don't have... There's a drafting situation which doesn't clarify exactly what means leaving a division.
Of course, but you could argue that the clear intent of the parties was that you were not able to benefit from the profits from non-footballing asset sales, and therefore there is a failure of the drafting. I mean,
under UEFA legislation, that's clear.
Yeah,
but I don't think it's ever been clear.
Well, it's not clear, but I think it's also...
Well, it is in UEFA legislation, isn't it?
It is in UEFA, but not in the Premier League. But I think, it is also fair to say that the Premier League clubs will be horrified by the fact that by being relegated and happening to have a accounting reference date of the 30th of June rather than the 31st of May means that you effectively avoid a 6-point penalty deduction.
Yeah.
Clearly, there's a number of clubs that are going to be absolutely furious this morning.
Well, that's right, Stefan. It's such a good point. I mean, Danny, from a footballing point of view, other clubs who might find themselves in a relegation battle have also got to deal with the fact now that they've got Leicester City who will not be handicapped by any points deduction.
Yeah, I think if you're judging your season and hoping for other teams to be punished for things that, are away from the football field, then you've not got a particularly great plan moving forward, have you? If you're relying on Leicester getting point. I understand the injustice of it. I don't see the injustice around. I've heard a lot this morning around, Forest and Everton must be fuming but they stayed up. It's kind of irrelevant.
Yeah. I think the argument would be about the hypocrisy, because Leicester were one of the clubs that are potentially lining up to sue Everton as a result of the compensation that may be available to them, and they probably will now have the brass neck to do it. Because why wouldn't they?
Was that conjecture though, or was that fact?
No, I think that's one of the clubs that were in there. I mean, Stefan can speak to it probably more.
Stefan, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll talk more. But going into this break, I'll put it in layman terms. Have Leicester got away with one here, big time?
In relation to 22-23, yeah, of course. There is some wrinkles on it, but of course they've got away with a very big one. I mean, it's 6 points probably.
What would they have got for 6 points?
I think 6 points before mitigation. We talked previously as to whether they could still have mitigation despite pursuing this route around the drafting. And actually, the more you look at it, I think they probably could still have got mitigation had this appeal gone against them, because they could have said, look, everybody admitted this was a reasonable argument to run and wasn't about cooperation or early admission. This was a good argument. We lost on it, had they lost, but it was still not a fair argument, so we still should get some mitigation. So maybe they would have ended up with 3-4 points.
You think, even though they confected an outcome by bringing back their accountancy date?
Well, I think this says
pushing forward their accountancy date.
Because in fairness to Leicester, the panel said we accept that it was not a deliberate move of the accounting date to circumvent PSR.
Really?
It was a perfectly reasonable thing to do in terms of the rules. So they never would have been that never would have been an aggravating factor.
But it did circumvent PSR because ultimately what it did was it took them out of jurisdiction.
That's not the finding of either the Independent Commission or the appeal. So I think that would be unfair to say to Leicester that there was a circumvention. It was a legitimate approach.
As we hit this break, what we do know is the Premier League rulebook needs changing and hasn't been watertight. It'll need to be watertight, will it not, when it comes to Manchester City?
Jim White and Simon Jordan. Monday to Friday mornings from 10 on AM, on DAB, via the talkSPORT app and on your smart speaker. talkSPORT.